welcome to this first extra on Delaware education. I'm Nichelle Poston along with education reporter Avi Wolfman-Arndt. During the next half hour, we'll explore issues in and out of the classroom. We start with an issue that began last year when Delaware's Division for the Visually Impaired announced it was cutting back on services for blind students in Delaware.
Yeah, Nichelle, more than 100 students should be getting in-school visits from specialists. Instead, they're getting services via email. The changes are supposed to be temporary, but it still has parents upset, and many say it points to larger problems.
The good thing is about being blind is the fact that anything you don't want to see, you don't see, so.
19-year-old Elizabeth Harrington has been blind since birth, and seemingly since that day, she and her mom, Debbie, have been fighting for her educational future.
If you're a kid that can see, you go in school, you have a textbook, and you do your homework from the textbook. Well, it's not that simple for Elizabeth.
Take, for instance, the statistics class Elizabeth is taking to fulfill her math requirement.
They do charts and graphs. So those charts and those graphs, I don't get. I don't understand at all.
Elizabeth just returned to Appoquinimink High School in Middletown, Delaware for the second semester of her senior year. She's supposed to receive 5 visits a week from a TVI, or teacher for the visually impaired, to help translate class materials into a format she can understand. Right now, she's only receiving 3 visits a week.
I don't know if I'm going to pass instead of, I don't know.
For the last 1.5 years, Elizabeth has attended the Maryland School for the Blind because Delaware simply hasn't been able to provide the education Elizabeth needs. She wanted to come home to finish high school, but even that might prove too difficult.
If you have to take another year because you simply haven't gotten the process down or the information down, the academics down, that's one thing. But if you have to take another year because you couldn't get the education services that you deserve, then that's a totally different story.
The Harringtons aren't alone in their struggle. Delaware's Division for the Visually Impaired estimates that about a quarter of the state's 260 blind and visually impaired public school students aren't getting the full services they're entitled to. While that shortage is supposed to be temporary, local advocates believe blind students in Delaware have always been an afterthought.
There is a school for the deaf, and the deaf-blind students are also served under that statewide program. And then there is a statewide autism program as well. There is no school for the blind in Delaware.
Instead, Delaware uses a model where specialists visit students in their home schools. In Delaware, the student-teacher ratio for these specialists is 28-1, about double the national average. As a result, says Lisa Lawson of the Brandywine School District, blind students sometimes aren't even offered the extra help they need. She remembers one case vividly.
So we were discussing it for this one particular child, and we agreed as a team that he required some extended year services. The teacher for the visually impaired, and no fault to her, said something to the effect of, well, we can't do that because there are only 2 teachers for the visually impaired that are working in the summer, and I know they're already spread thin, and I have one of them downstate, so we can't do that.
The responsibility for reforming the system now falls to Dan Madrid, director of Delaware's Division for the Visually Impaired. Last summer, a legislative task force called for big changes. They included lowering the student-teacher ratio and increasing the number of orientation and mobility specialists, among other things.
That's another one. You're exactly right. That was rib.
I think the next 6 months to a year, as we continue to implement the evidence-based practices, as we continue to rehire, train, and create future teachers in Delaware, I think that will ultimately tell us where we're going to end up in the long run.
Despite present shortages and long-time complaints, advocates and officials sense a real opportunity. All involved say they're united and pushing for change.
Nobody here is angry at the people. We're angry at the system.
In that piece, you saw classroom footage of Terry Hitchens, an 8th grader who recently went blind, and his teacher, Dorothy Mumford. The teachers who travel around the state working with blind students really do a remarkable job. The complaint here is not with the quality of the teaching. Rather, it's the lack of resources and the lack of staff.
So I'm guessing teachers are just as frustrated as the parents.
Absolutely. I got an email from one teacher who said, I don't know what our program is anymore. I don't know what it's supposed to be. And she wrote that she used to feel good at the end of each month after doing this job, and now it's hard because she doesn't know if she's fulfilling her commitments to the students.
So what's the next step here?
Well, last year there was a legislative task force. They came out with recommendations. Now there's a group putting together a strategic plan to improve services for blind students in Delaware.
Okay, thanks, Avi. As always, you can read more at newsworks.org/Delaware.